Welcome, the anointed ones. When a group has to keep explaining why you're the problem, it's usually because reality stopped agreeing with them. There's a strange pattern that repeats itself everywhere. Families, workplaces, churches, online spaces, even whole communities. One person gets singled out, constantly talked about, constantly attacked, constantly blamed. And the attacks don't stop even after that person leaves, improves, stays quiet, or clearly outgrows the environment. In fact, the attacks often get louder, not sharper. Louder. That's not confidence. That's exposure. Here's a documented psychological fact most people never connect to real life. Groups only maintain long-term hostility toward an individual when that individual disrupts the group's shared belief system. Not because the person is aggressive, not because they're loud, but because their existence quietly contradicts what the group agreed to believe about themselves. Once that contradiction becomes visible, the group has two options: evolve or attack. Most choose the second one. It's cheaper, no self-reflection required, and let's be honest for a moment, if you were truly insignificant, they would have moved on already. Nobody keeps holding meetings about someone who doesn't matter. Nobody keeps rehearsing the same story for months or years unless something about that person refuses to disappear. Silence would have worked by now. Distance would have worked. Smear campaigns usually burn out fast when there's no truth fighting back. But here you are, still standing, still intact, still being discussed like a community project that refuses to fail. That's where things get uncomfortable for them, because at some point, people start noticing patterns. The attacks don't evolve, but you do. The accusations stay frozen in time, but your life doesn't. The story they tell about you requires constant maintenance, like an old generator that only runs if someone keeps pulling the cord. And every time they pull it, more people look over and think, why are they still talking about this person? Add a little irony to the mix. The very pressure meant to expose you ended up exposing them. They expected cracks. They got consistency. They expected collapse. They got clarity. That's not how these stories are supposed to go. At least not for the side that thought they had control. So if a community cannot stop attacking you, long after it makes sense, long after it looks reasonable, long after it should have ended, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation in slow motion, and whether they like it or not, they're being forced to watch something they never planned for. The realization that you weren't the problem they tried to label. You were the presence that revealed who really had one. And yes, nothing bonds people faster than a shared enemy. But nothing humbles a group quicker than realizing the enemy they picked refuses to fall apart on schedule. Number 1. Their obsession with discrediting you is not hatred. It's panic once the narrative collapsed. At the beginning, everything worked in their favor. They controlled the story, the tone, and the labels attached to your name. As long as people accepted the version of you they presented, the attacks felt effortless. They didn't have to prove much because the environment itself did the work for them. But something changed, and it wasn't loud or dramatic. Time stepped in. Behavior didn't match the accusations. Outcomes didn't support the storyline. You kept moving forward in a way that didn't align with who you were supposed to be. That's when panic replaced confidence. When a narrative collapses, people don't always admit it. They double down. That's why the attacks became repetitive instead of sharp. You'll notice they stopped bringing new information and started recycling the same claims. That's a key sign that belief has weakened. If the story was solid, it wouldn't need constant reinforcement. Truth doesn't need reminders. Lies do. What really unsettled them was not that you defended yourself, but that you didn't need to. Your consistency did the talking without trying to. While they kept explaining who you were, you kept demonstrating who you weren't. That gap created pressure, and pressure exposes motives. At that point, The goal stopped being about accountability or correction and became about control. They weren't trying to protect the community anymore. They were trying to protect the story that kept them comfortable. You also outlasted the emotional window they were counting on. Most attacks rely on fatigue. The plan is simple. Keep pushing until the person reacts, collapses, or confirms the narrative through frustration. When that didn't happen, confusion set in. People who expect a reaction don't know what to do with restraint. So the volume goes up, not because it's effective, but because it's the only move left. That's why the obsession feels excessive. You're watching people fight a version of reality that already moved on. They're arguing with outcomes, not opinions. And deep down, they know it. Panic doesn't look like fear. It looks like urgency. It looks like people trying to fix something that's already broken by pretending it still works. The attacks continue because stopping would force them to face the truth. The story failed, and you didn't. Number 2, they are being forced to witness that your endurance broke their theory about you. From the start, they weren't just watching you. They were studying you. Every reaction, every pause, every mistake was being logged in their minds. They had a theory about how you would break. Maybe you'd explode. Maybe you'd beg. Maybe you'd turn bitter, reckless, or desperate enough to prove them right. That theory wasn't random. It was carefully built from how other people behaved under pressure. You were supposed to follow the same script. Most people do. But endurance ruined the experiment. You kept showing up whole, not loud, not performative, just intact. The pressure didn't turn you into something ugly, and that unsettled them more than any argument ever could. Because once endurance enters the picture, excuses stop working. You didn't win by overpowering them. You won by outlasting the frame they tried to trap you in. What really broke their theory was time. Anyone can fake strength for a week or two. Very few can remain steady through months of being misunderstood, targeted, and discussed behind closed doors. Endurance exposes what's real, and what became clear was this. The version of you they predicted never arrived. No meltdown, no public collapse, no behavior they could point to and say, "See, this is who they really are." That forced them into an uncomfortable position. They could no longer claim they were reacting to your actions because your actions stayed measured. So the focus shifted. They started reacting to your survival itself. Your calm became suspicious. Your restraint became calculated. When endurance can't be attacked directly, it gets reframed as something negative. That's how you know the theory failed. The hardest part for them to accept is that endurance can't be argued with. It doesn't need speeches or explanations. It simply keeps going. And the longer it goes, the weaker their conclusions look. They expected the pressure to reveal your flaws. Instead, it revealed their assumptions. You didn't prove anything by fighting back. You proved everything by not becoming what they needed you to be. And once that happens, there's no way to unsee it, especially for the people who were watching the closest. Number 3, the attacks intensified because your presence exposes hidden hierarchies. Some environments run on rules that are never spoken out loud. Who gets grace? Who gets protected? Who gets questioned? Who gets ignored? As long as everyone plays their assigned role, the system feels stable. The moment you showed up fully yourself, without bending or performing, those quiet rankings started to wobble. Not because you challenged them directly, but because your presence made certain advantages visible. You didn't have to confront leadership or call anyone out. The imbalance showed itself naturally. People noticed who was allowed to make mistakes and still be defended, and who wasn't. They noticed who could speak recklessly without consequences, and who had every word examined. Once those patterns become obvious, authority starts to feel fragile. That's when pressure is applied, not to restore fairness, but to restore order. The attacks weren't personal at first, they were corrective. You were being pushed back into a lower position without anyone having to admit there even was a hierarchy. When that didn't work, frustration set in. You kept existing outside the lane they quietly assigned you. You weren't playing the part of the grateful outsider or the manageable voice. That refusal alone exposed how much control mattered to them. What made it worse was how others responded to you. Without meaning to, people listened. They paid attention. Not because you demanded it, but because something about your steadiness disrupted the flow of automatic loyalty. When influence forms without permission, it makes unspoken power structures nervous. Influence is supposed to be granted from the top down, not noticed organically. So the attacks escalated, not to silence you, but to warn everyone else. This is what happens when someone doesn't stay in their place. Communities protect hierarchies more fiercely than they protect truth. Once that reality surfaces, anyone who exposes it becomes a problem that must be managed. The irony is that the more they attacked you, the clearer the hierarchy became. People could see who was being defended without evidence and who was being challenged without cause. The system told on itself. You didn't dismantle anything, you revealed it. And when power is revealed instead of assumed, it loses its grip. That's why your presence couldn't be tolerated quietly. It wasn't your words that threatened them. It was the clarity you brought into a space that depended on invisibility to survive. Number 4, they are being cornered by their own receipts. At first, everything they said about you lived in the moment. Loose statements, confident opinions, strong claims with no need for backup, because nobody expected them to be challenged later. It was all spoken as if time wouldn't matter. But time always matters. Conversations don't disappear the way people think they do. Messages get saved, reactions get remembered, patterns start forming whether anyone plans for it or not. What's cornering them now isn't your response. It's consistency. Their words from the past don't line up with their behavior in the present. What they once claimed with certainty now sounds exaggerated, emotional, or outright false when placed next to actual outcomes. The story they told about you required you to fail, spiral, or be exposed. None of that happened. Instead, the receipts started pointing back at them. That's when panic shows up, disguised as defensiveness. You'll notice sudden rewrites of history. Statements like, "That's not what I meant," or "You're taking it out of context," or "Things were different back then." Those aren't explanations. They're escape routes. When people feel cornered by their own words, they don't correct themselves. They blur the record. But the clearer the trail, the harder that becomes. What makes this situation uncomfortable for them is that they can't accuse you of manipulation without highlighting their own inconsistency. They spoke freely when they thought no one would remember. Now memory has weight. Screenshots don't argue, timelines don't get emotional, patterns don't take sides. They just sit there, quietly contradicting the version of events being pushed now. And here's the part they didn't plan for. You didn't have to collect evidence aggressively. Life did it for you. When someone keeps attacking a person over time, they create documentation by default. Each repeat accusation adds another layer to the record. Each overreaction strengthens the contrast between their words and reality. Being cornered doesn't always look like guilt. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like mockery. Sometimes it looks like trying to discredit the idea of evidence altogether. But beneath all of it is the same issue. The past won't stay buried. The receipts exist and they don't need interpretation. They simply show that what was said then cannot survive what's visible now. Number 5. Their unity is artificial, sustained only by a shared enemy. At first glance, the group looks organized, loyal, and coordinated. They appear to have a purpose, a cause, a rhythm that holds them together. But look closer, and it's obvious. The glue keeping them aligned isn't respect, shared vision, or integrity. It's fear of losing the story they've built around you. Their cohesion depends entirely on a single factor: someone to attack, someone to blame, someone to keep them aligned without having to confront their own flaws. You became that factor. Once you existed outside their control, everything about the group started to wobble. The conversations that once felt unified now contain cracks. People argue quietly, alliances shift, loyalties become transactional, and the group's confidence in itself begins to crumble. Without the attacks, without the shared target, they have nothing holding them together. That's why the attacks keep coming. It isn't about you anymore. It's about preserving their fragile structure. The irony is brutal. While they thought the attacks would diminish your presence, the opposite happened. Each effort to control or discredit you exposed the hollow nature of their cohesion. Their supposed strength depended on your perceived weakness. And as your presence continues to defy the narrative, they're forced to confront a reality they cannot fix. They are only unified because of you, not in spite of themselves. You didn't create this tension. You just existed. By remaining steady, consistent, and unshakable, you revealed the invisible fault lines. Their friendships, their hierarchies, their supposed loyalty, all of it depends on a villain to maintain. Remove that villain, and they have to face themselves. The louder they attack, the more obvious it becomes that their solidarity is performative. Every overreaction, every recycled accusation, every desperate attempt to rally others highlights the truth. They are a group held together by opposition, not authenticity. And watching them scramble to maintain control while failing to actually diminish you is proof enough that the community's foundation was never about principles or character. It was about survival, and survival always looks messy when the target refuses to play along. Number 6. They are being forced to see that you didn't recruit followers. Witnesses formed naturally. Your influence wasn't loud. It didn't need a campaign, a speech, or an explanation. People started noticing, not because you told them to, but because they couldn't help seeing the way you moved through life, the choices you made, the calm consistency you carried. That alone is terrifying to a group that thrives on control. They expect influence to be manufactured, attention to be bought, and loyalty to be earned on someone else's terms. You broke all of that without trying. The witnesses around you didn't join to prove a point. They didn't sign up for a cause. They simply observed and understood something the attackers refused to see. That quiet recognition is the most inconvenient kind because it cannot be discredited easily. The group can attack you verbally, distort your actions, and repeat lies, but they can't make people unsee what they've already witnessed. Real recognition grows organically. Manufactured loyalty collapses under pressure. This is why the attacks escalate instead of stopping. It's not just that you exist, it's that people are noticing and validating your integrity on their own. Your presence becomes a benchmark, a silent standard that exposes who acts with authenticity and who doesn't. Every attempt to manipulate perception backfires because the truth of your character is already visible to those paying attention. It can't be faked or erased. They struggle with this because they believed they controlled influence. That recognition only happens if they allow it. But when it forms naturally, it flips the entire power dynamic. The more people quietly acknowledge what they see, the more frustrated the attackers become. Every attack is a failed attempt to rewrite reality. Every reaction is proof that your consistency cannot be explained by their rules. And the most humiliating part for them is that you didn't need to guide or persuade anyone. You didn't orchestrate admiration or force understanding. It formed because of who you are, not who they hoped you'd be. That realization, that your presence alone created a following without effort, forces them to confront the one truth they cannot argue. You are recognized because you earned it effortlessly, and nothing they do can change that. Number 7. The attacks reveal that they studied you more than they ever studied themselves. When a community obsesses over someone, it's rarely about curiosity. It's about control. They catalog your habits, analyze your words, scrutinize your decisions, and memorize your patterns, thinking that if they know you completely, they can predict and manipulate you. They dedicate time, energy, and mental bandwidth to dissecting every move you make, all while conveniently ignoring the glaring contradictions in their own behavior. The irony is brutal. They understand you better than they understand themselves, and that imbalance is what fuels their frustration. Their attacks become frantic because deep down, they know you're untouchable in the ways that matter. They've studied you enough to realize that evidence, truth, and consistency are on your side, but they haven't studied themselves enough to adjust. Every accusation, insult, or rumor they throw is a reflection of their assumptions, not reality. By focusing so much on you, they've trapped themselves in a loop of comparison, constantly measuring their perception against your actual presence, and constantly failing to reconcile the two. This over-analysis also exposes their weakness. The more they monitor, the more obvious their obsession becomes. They try to predict your reactions, but the truth is, you rarely react the way they anticipate, and that unpredictability shakes the entire foundation they rely on. They expect control because they studied patterns, but studying someone doesn't equate to understanding them, and that's the gap that kills their confidence. Meanwhile, they remain blind to their own hypocrisy. They haven't examined their motives, their insecurities, or their flaws with the same intensity they use on you. Their mental energy is consumed by trying to prove you wrong, while the evidence of their own contradictions piles up silently. What the attacks reveal most clearly is this: the obsession isn't about you being a threat. It's about them confronting the fact that they've invested more effort into dissecting your life than understanding their own. That realization is terrifying for them, because it means all their strategies, all their narratives, and all their supposed superiority crumble when placed against the simple fact that they are acting out of fixation, not wisdom. And the more they attack, the more obvious it becomes that they are struggling with themselves, not with you. Number 8. They are being forced to admit you outgrew the role they assigned you. From the very beginning, they imagined you fitting into a carefully constructed box. They decided how you should behave, how far you could rise, how much influence you could wield, and what failures would make you human enough for their comfort. Every boundary they drew was meant to keep you predictable, contained, and manageable. But you didn't stay inside that box. You grew beyond it in ways they could neither anticipate nor control. Your growth isn't flashy or performative. It's steady, undeniable, and natural. Every achievement, every calm response, every quiet display of integrity slowly dismantled the expectations they held. And that's what makes them furious. They didn't just want you limited, they wanted to define your limits. By refusing to conform, you forced them into a moment of brutal honesty. The narrative they had written about you no longer applied. The role they assigned didn't exist anymore. This revelation is unbearable for a group that thrives on certainty. Their attacks intensify, not because they're exposing flaws in you, but because they're trying desperately to pull you back into the framework they created. Every insult, every rumor, every attempt at manipulation is a signal that they are wrestling with the truth. They are powerless to dictate your trajectory. They expected compliance, but instead they were confronted with independence, the kind of independence that highlights their own dependency on control. Outgrowing the role also exposes their assumptions to anyone paying attention. Observers see the contrast between what they tried to enforce and who you actually are. It's impossible to hide when someone consistently surpasses expectations, refuses to be constrained, and operates from a place of authenticity. That visibility amplifies the frustration, because the evidence is obvious to everyone, including themselves. Ultimately, you didn't just outgrow a role, you outgrew their capacity to understand you. And when people are forced to admit that someone has moved beyond the limitations they imposed, it is disorienting, humiliating, and infuriating all at once. Your growth became undeniable proof that control never belonged to them, and that realization is something they will resist admitting for as long as they can. Number 9. The attacks are attempts to provoke a version of you that no longer exists. The people attacking you aren't just responding to who you are now. They're reacting to who they thought you would be, or who they hoped you would become under pressure. They've built a mental version of you, one that would crumble, panic, lash out, or confirm every accusation they've ever made. Their attacks are carefully designed to provoke that reaction. Every insult, every manipulation, every rumor is a trap meant to catch the version of you that exists only in their imagination. The problem for them is that version doesn't exist anymore. You've changed, evolved, and adapted in ways that make their old strategies useless. You respond with steadiness where they expect chaos. You remain calm where they hope for breakdown. You stay measured where they anticipate erratic reactions. Each attack lands on an empty target, because the person they think they know was never real. The version of you they're trying to provoke has been replaced by someone far stronger, far more aware, and far less manipulable. That's what drives their frustration. They are fighting a ghost, yet they cannot let go. The attacks continue because giving up would require admitting that their assumptions were wrong, and that's something their pride and ego cannot allow. Every recycled accusation, every predictable attempt at provocation is evidence of their own desperation. They are desperately trying to create cracks where none exist, forcing a reaction that you refuse to give. Meanwhile, every time they fail to provoke you, the gap between expectation and reality becomes more obvious. Observers begin to notice it too. The community sees that their tactics are ineffective, that the chaos they promised isn't materializing, and that the calm, measured individual they tried to control is thriving despite their efforts. By attacking a version of you that no longer exists, they are revealing their weakness more than yours. The more they attempt to provoke a reaction, the more apparent it becomes that their power was never real, and that the real you cannot be bent, manipulated, or broken by the outdated strategies they cling to. Their attacks are echoes of a failed experiment, and with each echo, your strength becomes clearer to everyone watching. Number 10. They are being forced to confront the fact that you never needed their approval to remain intact. From the very beginning, their attacks were designed to break you, to make you question yourself, to force dependence on their judgment or validation. They assumed that constant criticism, gossip, and pressure would make you crumble, beg, or at least conform to the image they wanted you to be. That assumption is the foundation of most attacks, the belief that people cannot thrive without approval, that silence or endurance is impossible under scrutiny. But you didn't play by their rules. You stayed whole, steady, and unshaken, completely independent of their validation. That reality terrifies them. They spent so much time thinking their judgment mattered, their opinions shaped outcomes, and their approval could define you. Every calculated attack was meant to remind you of your place within their story. When that didn't work, every action they took became louder, more aggressive, and more frantic. The louder they screamed, the clearer it became that your stability never depended on them. They weren't confronting weakness. They were confronting autonomy, and it's impossible to bully someone who doesn't need you to survive. The frustration shows itself in how predictable and repetitive their attacks become. When someone depends on your approval, a single attack is enough. But when someone doesn't, every tactic fails, forcing them to recycle the same strategies, hoping one will stick. Their obsession grows because they are witnessing something they cannot control. A person thriving without ever needing permission or consent from the very voices trying to tear them down. Your independence also forces them to look in the mirror, whether they want to or not. Their belief that they held power is exposed as false. They realize that every attempt to define or shape you has failed. They attack to assert control, but the truth is in your presence, calm, intact, unshakable. And that is the final proof that you were never dependent on their approval in the first place. By refusing to collapse under their judgment, you don't just survive, you highlight their impotence. They are forced to watch someone live unbound by their opinions, and the realization that their influence was never required becomes a silent, unbearable truth. Number 11. The repeated attacks are rehearsals to convince themselves, not the public. When a group keeps attacking you over and over, it isn't about making anyone else believe their version of events. The truth is, the public often already senses the disconnect between accusation and reality. The attacks are primarily for the people doing the attacking, a way for them to reassure themselves that the narrative they built still matters. Every insult, every rumor, every recycled argument is less about you and more about reinforcing their own illusion of control. They repeat the same story because deep down they know it's shaky. If it was solid, there would be no need to go over it again and again. The constant repetition is a psychological rehearsal, a desperate attempt to convince themselves that the truth still aligns with their perception. Each cycle of attack is meant to overwrite doubt that has already started creeping in. They want to silence their own guilt, their own fear, and the creeping realization that you have survived their tactics unscathed. What makes this even more revealing is how obvious it becomes to everyone observing. When attacks are genuine and rational, they evolve, they adapt, they provide new evidence or shift focus based on circumstances. But repeated attacks that never change indicate panic and insecurity. They are rehearsing a version of reality that exists only in their heads, trying to manufacture certainty where there is none. Meanwhile, you remain unaffected. You don't play along. You don't mirror their fear or aggression. You simply exist consistently, refusing to validate their false narratives. And that's what makes the repetition so humiliating for them. Every new attack is an admission that the old ones didn't work, that their assumptions failed, and that the reality they refuse to face continues to unfold without them having any power over it. Ultimately, the repeated attacks reveal more about the attackers than the attacked. They are a confession in motion, a loop of insecurity trying to convince itself that it is still right. And as long as you remain steady, the rehearsals expose their fragility, proving that the only person they're trying to control is their own failing perception, and they're losing. Number 12. They are being forced to witness that the environment poisoned others, but not you. Most communities, groups, or networks have a way of shaping people without them noticing. Gossip, manipulation, favoritism, subtle pressure. It all seeps in quietly, molding behavior, bending morals, and exposing weaknesses over time. The people attacking you assumed you would succumb like everyone else. They expected the environment to leave its mark on you, to chip away at your composure, your integrity, your confidence, until you became just another product of the system they controlled. What they didn't account for is that you absorbed nothing toxic from their environment. Every attempt to taint you, confuse you, or manipulate you failed. While others around you grew defensive, petty, or opportunistic, you maintained clarity. Your perspective, decisions, and integrity stayed intact. That alone disrupts their whole worldview. They expect conformity because conformity is easier for them to measure, control, and predict. When it doesn't happen, they're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their power isn't universal, and their influence isn't absolute. Watching you thrive under the same pressure that bent everyone else is deeply humiliating for them. Every outburst, every attack, every rumor now feels like proof that their system didn't work the way they thought it would. They are forced to see the contrast. The environment they used to shape and control people, which succeeded with almost everyone, somehow failed with you. And that failure isn't yours. It's theirs. It exposes how much they relied on control rather than merit, influence rather than resilience. The irony is that they are still trying to change the narrative, still attempting to make you look compromised, still attacking the one person who escaped the very trap they designed. The harder they try, the more obvious it becomes to everyone observing. Their efforts to taint your reputation now highlight your strength and independence. You didn't just survive their toxicity. You exposed its selective impact, showing that no matter how carefully they try to manipulate a system, someone rooted in truth cannot be reshaped. And that is the core of their panic. You became a living contradiction, proof that their influence has limits, and that the environment they trusted to mold everyone else could not touch you. Number 13. Their inability to replace you exposed your irreplaceability. The people attacking you assumed that if they removed you, someone else could step in and fill the gap. They expected the void to be easily occupied, that the role, influence, or presence you carried could simply be replicated by another face, another voice, another personality. That assumption quickly revealed itself as false. Every attempt to replace you failed, and with every failure, your unique position became undeniable. It isn't about being liked, popular, or loud. It's about the consistency, the integrity, and the unshakable presence you brought that no one else could reproduce. Others could mimic actions or words, but the effect, the gravity of your character, the quiet command of attention and respect, could not be imitated. That realization shook the very foundations of those who attacked you, because it proved that their strategy wasn't just flawed, it was irrelevant. They weren't dealing with a replaceable part in a system. They were dealing with someone singular, someone essential. Every failed replacement made them more frantic. Each time they tried to insert a substitute, it became obvious not just to them, but to everyone watching that what you brought to the table couldn't be duplicated. That failure exposes their reliance on structure and hierarchy rather than genuine understanding or talent. Their plan always relied on the assumption that control could be restored by swapping out a person. You shattered that assumption simply by existing in a way that no one else could match. The irony is sharp. The harder they try to discredit you, the more visible your irreplaceability becomes. They thought they could erase or weaken your presence, but their actions only highlight the gap you occupy. Observers can see the difference. The contrast between you and those who attempted to take your place underscores what they can't control: your authenticity, your consistency, and the effect you naturally have on the environment. In the end, their attacks became proof of your singularity. Every failed attempt to replace you revealed the truth they never wanted to admit. You weren't just another member of the system they thought they controlled. You were the one they couldn't duplicate, the one they couldn't contain, and the one whose absence or misrepresentation exposed their impotence. Your irreplaceability wasn't just apparent. It was unavoidable, and that truth haunts every move they make against you. Number 14. They are being forced to accept that the attack season ended in your confirmation, not your destruction. All the attacks, all the plotting, all the endless attempts to discredit you were supposed to have an ending, one that benefited them, one that confirmed their narrative, one that made you collapse under pressure. They expected a season of chaos that would leave you diminished, broken, or at least shaken. Instead, that season ended in your confirmation, not in destruction, but in undeniable validation of who you are. Every move they made, every rumor spread, every whisper behind closed doors now serves as evidence that you survived, endured, and remained whole despite the onslaught. This realization is devastating for them because it flips the entire dynamic. What was intended as proof of weakness is now proof of strength. Every attack meant to expose flaws instead exposed their obsession, their fear, and the limits of their control. The narrative they worked to construct collapsed under the weight of your consistency, your restraint, and the simple fact that you refused to play by their rules. In trying to break you, they unintentionally documented your integrity, showing anyone paying attention that the accusations were hollow and the attacks were desperate. The confirmation isn't flashy. It isn't loud or performative. It's steady, undeniable, and lived quietly over time. Your actions, your calm, and your continued presence in the face of repeated attacks created a record they cannot erase. Every observer can see it. The community may still argue, the attackers may still insist, but reality refuses to bend. The story they expected to end with your downfall now ends with their exposure and your quiet triumph. They are forced to accept it because nothing else explains the gap between expectation and reality. The attacks were designed to destroy, but destruction never came. Instead, the season of hostility confirmed your endurance, your influence, and your unshakable presence. Every move they made, every effort to hurt or manipulate you, now circles back as proof, not of failure on your part, but of their inability to control, predict, or diminish someone who refused to comply with their narrative. That is the final blow. Realizing the campaign meant to erase you became the confirmation that set you apart. Conclusion. The truth is simple but unsettling. The more a community attacks you, the more obvious it becomes that their efforts say less about you and more about them. Every insult, every rumor, every repeated accusation is a reflection of their fear, their need for control, and their failure to understand a person who refuses to conform to their narrative. You were never just a target. You were a mirror, a disruptor, a living contradiction to the assumptions they held about power, influence, and obedience. They expected to see cracks, weakness, and compromise. Instead, they witnessed endurance, clarity, and integrity. Their attacks weren't successful because you didn't play the part they assigned. You became the proof that their strategies, their hierarchies, and their narratives could not contain someone who operates from truth. Across every attempt to discredit you, one thing became undeniable. Your presence changes the game. It forces people to confront their own hypocrisy, exposes artificial unity, and reveals their obsession with control. You didn't just survive their campaigns, you thrived despite them. Each attack intended to break you ended up documenting your strength. Each effort to provoke a reaction highlighted your restraint. Each attempt to replace or diminish you emphasized your irreplaceable role. And in the end, the season of attacks did not culminate in destruction as they had hoped. It culminated in confirmation that you are resilient, steadfast, and untouchable by narratives that rely on fear and falsehood. This is the power of existing authentically. You don't have to fight on their terms. You don't have to bend to expectations or seek their approval. Simply by staying consistent, measured, and true to yourself, you dismantle illusions, expose weaknesses, and shift the energy of entire communities without a single word. Their panic, their frustration, and their repeated attacks are just the evidence you've always needed. Your presence cannot be erased, and the truth will always rise above noise. If this message resonated with you, make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel so you're always here when the truth is spoken. Like this video to show support for standing firm against opposition. Comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Your story matters. And share this with anyone who needs to see that enduring with integrity is the ultimate confirmation of strength. Stay unshakable, because the world notices, even when they don't want to. God bless you.